What is going on, guys? Thanks for watching the channel. Matt Smith here. Like and subscribe as always. I hope everybody's been enjoying their bye week, has been able to catch themselves a little downtime, maybe spend some time, reintroduce yourself to your family, all that other stuff. But I've been keeping it low key. I've been lower on the content this week because we're gonna be hot and heavy with it here over the next month. I've got some fun stuff coming up, and certainly it should be extremely exciting down the stretch. Thanks everybody for tuning in as always. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe helps me out a ton. Getting all those algorithms and get off the ground a little bit more. And for everybody that's come along since I really kind of started this transition, I just wanted to say thanks for the support. I really appreciate it. You guys are always reaching out and being vocal. So means a lot. And thanks for being here. And, definitely enjoy talking Buffs football with you guys. And it's a lot of fun. So this week, clearly not much of a, not much newsworthy all that much. We did speak to Pat Shermer and Robert Livingston. And with Robert Livingston, he's been doing a really good job this year. He has surpassed all of my expectations to such a real degree that I know this man has a very bright future as a coach in the sport, wherever it is, whether it's at the NFL level, whether it's at the college level, further. I know that he will have a bright future because he's proved that now. I think he is. You just hear about the way everybody talks about him rather. You talk to him and kind of get to experience the human being that he is, and he's a guy you want to play for. And I heard Coach Sapp this week on a podcast say that he would follow him anywhere. And when you've got Coach Sapp saying things like that, I think that says volumes about the type of person he is, as respected by his peers and his players. We've heard Carter Stoutmeyer and Cameron Silman Craig, and you go down the list of everybody who plays on that defense who talks about what a joy it is to play for him. It's just a home run hire for Coach Prime. And, that group of pass rushers maybe started a little bit slower than we all thought, assuredly. Well, prior to last week, their numbers were looking really, really solid. They racked up a bunch of them in about 3 weeks there. And then against Cincinnati, things kind of, tailed off. But Sorsby, bit of a more mobile quarterback, not as easy to get down to the ground. And, I imagine that, moving forward, and look, here's the other part of it. Moving forward towards the end of the year, they have to be productive too. That's part of what makes this Colorado defense so improved is that pass rush getting home. But obviously, as we talked about with Coach Shermer, it's kind of happening more born out of a complementary basis, right? You're scoring earlier, you're taking a lead, and you're putting opponents behind the eight ball, and you're forcing them to do things that maybe they're not so comfortable with, at least not most of the opponents that they played this year. They're not pass heavy teams. Arizona was probably the first pass heavy team, and they took them to the woodshed with the way they got after Noah Fafita, and it should have been worse. I mean, I think Coach Prime talked about how they missed 5 sacks in that game. There were other scrambles. It should have been worse. And I think that's born obviously out of having a lead and them having to throw and you being able to, pin your ears back a little bit and get after their quarterback. So maybe that had something to do with it. But I think just you're seeing some timely sacks still, like Cameron Silman Craig on a 3rd down had a big one to get Cincinnati off the field in the second half, which look, this is a Buffs team right now who I think is set up in a really good spot as long as they stay healthy. But that's kind of part of the problem. Shadur's banged up. He had trouble getting down and then standing up at the press conference. That was a sight that we were very familiar with seeing last year. Just the constant barrage of pressure and hits had gotten to him, and I think it had started to. And maybe whereas after UCF, after the emotional game against Nebraska on the road, and then Colorado State with the rivalry game, good time to hit the reset button, kind of give your mind a break. And now you get back to action here. You go 2-1 over a stretch where you probably should have gone 3-0, and now bodies are hurting. Travis has been, nursing injuries. He obviously had a huge game against Cincinnati, but he was banged up, and then he got hurt late in that game too on that 50-yard bomb. Now, when I say hurt, I mean banged up a little bit. I'm sure he's fine. He's been fishing all week. He looks just fine. It's never going to affect his mood. You'd never be able to tell. Travis, I would say his poker face is, it's just always happy. So you're like, well, I don't know what this guy's got. He's just always smiling. Anyway, the point is that I think this is a good time to hit a reset. Obviously, whoever's playing on the offensive line, defensive line, those guys, this is the time of year when most of those guys are nursing a little something here or there, maybe a baby knee or a toe or something like that. So not a bad time to hit the reset. And I think it was important, coaching staff included, because here comes the home stretch, okay? Here comes the final 4 of the regular season. These are your gold games in November, Coach Mack used to call them, right? He had them up on the board. They used to have a schedule up on the team meeting room where they would list all the games, and then, you know, the nameplates of all the games, those 4 in November would be listed in gold because those are the gold games. They remember what you do in November. That's like the old adage, right? So you get remembered for the wins that you collect late in the season. And right now at 6-2 and 4-1 in conference play, Colorado is set up in a really good spot to collect some wins here coming down the home stretch. Okay, so watching this Texas Tech and Iowa State game, Texas Tech got a little bit of a lead here heading into halftime. Be great if they could find a way to win this one. And then you got, that's one of the losses you need. Colorado controls their own destiny in that internally. All they need to be focused about is getting to 10 wins. If you want a shot at the Big 12 title, if you want a shot at the college football playoff, 10 is the number you have to get to. Would have been great to get to 11, but we know it's one of those you're just going to have to keep pushing away the rest of the season, and then if it burns you, probably the rest of your life. That's just the way sports go. Bad losses, they stick. Those don't go away unless you find a way to make up for it, which is, again, right now, Texas Tech with a lead over Iowa State. That'd be big. That would be big for the Big 12 Conference. Certainly for me, I'm keeping an eye on this one the rest of Saturday. And then, obviously, Houston and Kansas State. I think Kansas State marched right down the field on Houston that first drive. I think the point of all this is, when we look at where they're at, they're in a really good spot compared to where a lot of other teams are around the country. And I think for Colorado, they're going to need help, but I think the consistency that they've shown, okay, over the last few weeks in developing their running game, in sticking with it and committing to it, in giving Isaiah Augustive the keys to RB1 and saying, build a rhythm, right? In some of the stuff they're doing with 11 personnel and run blocking, and you just see the entire operation improving week after week after week after week. And I think that's so important for good teams down the stretch, because the best teams get better as the year goes on. And certainly health has a lot to do with that, and it will the rest of the season for Colorado. But, you know, other stuff with Robert Livingston, not a huge week. I mean, look, they did a really good job adjusting, and the way that they adjusted, it's 14-14 against Cincinnati, okay? There's a moment there where you go, ooh, 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 ooh. This is going to be a shootout. Colorado's defense struggling to stop Corey Kiner, struggling to stop the run, started to look very similar to what we saw against Kansas State. Turns out not to be, because they made adjustments. And that 4th-and-1 stop was massive. It swung the game. It did. And then obviously scoring the next play to Travis Hunter. You got a 10-point lead into halftime. Bob's your uncle. You win. The point here is that this is a team that's maturing. They're getting better, and they put themselves in a really good spot. And not to mention they're evolving. And to transition over just a little bit to what we talked about with Pat Shurmur this week, you know, there was a viral moment I had, at least among coaching Twitter, where I talked to Pat about, or asked him about, what the difference was in creating a game plan for Sundays as opposed to Saturdays. And it's actually something I've been very curious about. And he's one of the very few people that kind of walked this planet that can really share about it as in depth, having held the position at both levels. Just not a lot of those guys exist, especially in the modern era. It's typically kind of like one or the other. Some guys bounce around, but you see it more specialized now. Well, Pat, a couple of years ago, did it in the NFL, and now he's calling an offense in college. So I was really curious to get his thoughts there about what the difference actually is, because you don't have as much time. You don't have as many players that are fully as bought in and maybe as football IQ dominant as you do in college, or as you would in the pros, because those guys are all professionals. They understand what it's like to study, at least most of them do, and they can pick up concepts. That's what helps you get to the pro level. But I mean, when we look at some of these college athletes, some of these guys, you know, end up transferring and then staying in the portal, and that's all the football they play. So you're dealing with a different audience that you're teaching to, a different caliber of experience that you're trying to teach to. And so for Pat, I was curious to see how that transition is coming along, and what a fascinating answer he gave us about how, look, in the NFL, you've got like 3 or 4 games within the game, and I'll actually drop that clip in right here and let him explain it to you.
Time restraints, I'm just curious, and kind of following up over those last 2 questions. What's the difference between creating a game plan for the NFL and for Saturdays?
Well, it's different, right? And it's going to have to be a different setting for me to really answer your question. Okay. We're probably going to have to sit down, and I can take you through it. But in the NFL, because of the way the rosters are designed, I always really thought of it as it was 3 or 4 different games within the game. So in other words, you had first and second down, right? Then this animal called third down, where now that's a totally different game. third down. And then you have red zone. That's a totally different game. In the red zone, you know, they're defending, you know, you're attacking extremes. They either drop them all out or bring them all right? So you're there. In third downs, you know, a lot more man, a lot more exotic pass rush, so on. What I've found in college so far is there isn't quite as much of that. It's kind of like one fluid game. So as an example, you'll find teams that'll play the same coverage concepts on third down and in the red zone as they would on first and second down. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So with the exceptions, don't get me wrong, you get more zero blitz in the red zone and so forth. Maybe a little more man on, you know, so you call man beaters. But in the NFL, it's very distinct. Very distinct. You know, it's like I said, 3 games within a game. Here, it's just kind of one fluid game, and I think there's a reason for it. Teams play no huddle, right? And so you're lined up ready to go, and so you don't have the time in the huddle to organize all that stuff you might want to do. And so I think that's one big difference in college ball tactically than pro ball.
As you go through a season, does your offense evolve or does it refine?
Oh, wow. That's kind of some white wine thinking.
Appreciate
No,
that.
it definitely evolves, right? Because I like to try to, you know, run 4 or 5 things each week that they haven't seen. So that's evolving. But then the refinement piece is you want to be able to run some of the same things every week and do it better. And that's the advantage of practice. So to answer your question, I think it's both. If you're, you know, you got the right players and you're doing the right things, you can refine and evolve. In fact, I might steal that from you. Refine and evolve.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
That's
Then,
stuff.
if you're going to steal
I'll give it to you.
If you're going to steal, then I get one more. Then.
All right.
How much have you evolved and refined as an offense over this season?
I think a lot, and the reason I say that is I have a better feel for the players that we have. I feel like we're playing better and better each week, but that can all come to a screeching halt if we don't keep working.
Right.
So we're going to try to next few days refine, and evolve.
A couple of things I love there from Pat, right? He talks about how in the NFL it is complex. You have more time to work with some of these guys and to install some things. You have more time in the huddle, but in college, because everybody's going so fast, it's more of a free-flowing game. So you can't necessarily run as much as you would in the NFL or specifics on a week-to-week basis. It has to be more of your overall game plan. And he talked about, well, clearly there's exceptions to the rule, but you see a lot of where first and second down coverages are what you're going to see in the red zone, because that's kind of how the game flows. You don't necessarily have as much time to get everybody on the same page, so you've got to make sure everybody knows what they're doing. And the easiest way to do that is to kind of stay within the flow of what you're doing and have a system. And I think that's what he's learned. It's a fascinating takeaway because he's right. And to hear the intricacies of the way that he explained it, obviously that's something that, you know, none of us could really kind of detail as explicitly. So great stuff. And then I asked him about evolving or refining, right? This concept of, do you evolve as an offense? Do you refine? Is it both? Because I wonder, like, as a play caller, do you sit down before the year? Here's all the plays. You know, this is what I want to run. And then throughout the year, you pepper things in, which is what I imagined, which would be your evolution of your offense, which is, hey, we did it this way to start the year, and now we're doing it a completely different way. Because if we think back to the way they finished the Nebraska game and then the way they've done things since, except for the Kansas State game, at least offensively, they have evolved in a drastic way offensively. 11 personnel, different personnel that they're actually using, not just packages, different actual players. And a lot of this kind of goes to scheming around their weaknesses, addressing their strengths, trying to get guys the ball in space with a position to break a tackle and do something with it. And I think for Pat right now, he's finding his groove. And when you have Shedeur and you have Travis, those guys are almost like, they should almost have co-OC titles. You see some of the stuff on Well Off, they're drawing up plays on the fly. And the credit to Pat Shurmur for being willing to trust them and listen to them and let them contribute, because that's a very essential set of eyes. And Coach Prime is a big proponent of, look, they're on the field. We need to see what they see. We can't see it over here. Tell me what you see. And when you have guys as experienced and as intelligent and forthright as Travis and Shedeur, that makes your job as a coach that much easier, because you can actually have faith in their account of what's happening most of the time. And if not, you use your eye in the sky, and you've got those guys. But you've got to let these guys kind of who have played so many snaps together, who've played a lot of football in general, and are so damn good, be able to call the shots from time to time. And Pat said the other day, look, as long as I know what's going on and what we're running, I'm good with it, which I appreciate. But that's also the supreme level. It should indicate the supreme level of trust that he has in Shedeur Sanders. It's significant. It's very significant. You don't just do that with anybody at this level, and you can kind of get away with that. I'm going to guess that the next quarterback probably isn't going to have the liberties, the shot calling ability, and the freedom that Shedeur probably did this year based upon just trust, right? It's something that cannot be bought. It has to be earned. That's what we know about that. So really cool to hear him talk about, hey, look, the evolution is what we're adding into our offense, the different things that we're going to do, learning more about who we are and how we want to do things. And the refinement piece is taking what we already do really well, our bread and butter, the stuff that makes us successful, and then getting better at it and getting sharper and cleaning things up so that we're crisper, we're tighter, we're faster, and obviously just more mature, more graduate level understanding of your own offense and what you're trying to do. So really cool to hear him weave all that stuff together. And outside of that, obviously, I think Travis went down to Texas to fish with Coach Prime. We saw that well off. And then obviously today, shout out to whoever thought of the idea. I'm going to guess it's Constance. Maybe it was Coach Prime, but shout out to the whole team for coming up with Travis should be the first college player on their bye week to ever appear on set at College Game Day. And then he did it the same day he did Big Noon Kickoff because they were both at Happy Valley. So, I mean, kill two birds with one stone. Sorry, PETA. The point was, that's a cool thing. And that's marketing genius you're not going to find in other places. And Travis was there not only representing himself, he was primarily, but also making sure Shedeur was represented because Shedeur, obviously, if you've been watching the channel, you know how I feel about that. He hasn't been represented in these talks, and it's time that he should be. And I'm glad that he's being recognized as such. You're starting to see more and more his name in the top 10 at least start to filter in, which we know how ridiculous that is. But I'm glad that he's starting to filter into the top 10. So from that perspective, the bye week, I think, has been pretty good. You saw some, practices where Travis didn't practice. A lot of the ones didn't practice because, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think rest and recovery this week is very important, but also is dialing back in and plugging back into the matrix and figuring out. Now, I think the lack of hopefully, knock on wood, the lack of an 8:30 local time kickoff that they would be used to, their bodies would be, which is what they had to do against Kansas State, essentially. I don't think that's going to be the case in Lubbock. I think it's like 1 o'clock or like 7 o'clock. They were flexed into that window because they beat Cincinnati at home, which is what would have happened against Cincinnati had they beaten Kansas State. But I digress. The point is that I think things are setting up well. Get everybody back, get everybody dialed in and locked in. And now you're rounding the corner, Secretariat. This is the home stretch, okay? You got to let the air out of the tires, and now it's all you got. You got to give it all you got because these are the times as a student athlete, as a coach, you look back on and you remember. And if you leave anything on the table, it kills you the rest of your life. So now's everything's got to be ratcheted up to 11. I should not have to, as a coach, remind you to lock in because you should know what we have on the table. So understand when we take the field for practice, that's my mentality. I'm not reminding anybody about effort. If I have to remind you about effort today, you can skip practice today. That's how I would approach it as a coach. Time for foolishness should be over. You should understand what's in front of you here. Like that's the intensity they need to have here to dial everybody back in, because even though on paper it looks solid here with the teams that you're going to play, those teams can knock you off. You still have to go to Arrowhead and play a Kansas team that should not be 2-6. They're way better than that, okay? And they're still pretty healthy in general. You're going to have to play Utah. I know they don't have their quarterback, and they look like one of the worst teams in the conference, but that's a Utah team and a coach in Kyle Whittingham who has your number. You got to be dialed. Same thing goes for Oklahoma State. They're struggling right now. I understand that. That's still a good football program, okay? It still is. They come from a history of winning at Oklahoma State. You're going to have to be dialed in for that one. So, and all those teams, oh, by the way, will love to play spoiler if you're spotless up until then, and that all goes without talking about what you got to do in Lubbock next week against a team that's leading at halftime right now. I'm pretty sure against Iowa State. I saw Iowa State got a little interception there before the half, just for my own purposes. Wanted to see what it was at. Boy, UCLA 13-7 over Nebraska at half. Would love Nebraska right now. Good. I would love Nebraska next week, but I digress. Iowa State did. They scored. Yeah. They scored at the end of the first half. Okay. Well, I mean, look, Texas Tech was a 13.5 point dog in that game for a reason. So they held the lead for most of the first half, and they got their quarterback right. Now's the time. You got to dial back in. Everything's still in front of you. And look, we'll get back to action on Tuesday with Coach Prime's presser. In the comments, let me know what you're thinking. If you have any interesting questions, best questions, I'm always open to hearing questions. And kind of putting my own spin on them. So you have anything you want to ask or anything you want to talk about, drop them in the comments. I appreciate everybody for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing. Helps me out a ton. And we'll talk to you. Gonna watch some football. Got to finish these football games and then watch some NFL and we'll talk to you next week as we get ready to make a trip down to Lubbock. Weather's starting to turn here in Boulder. It's starting to be a little chilly now. I think we're getting our snow next week. So again, thanks everybody for listening. I'm getting back to my college football Saturday, and I hope you do too. And as always, I appreciate the support.